Hey everybody, welcome back to the More Memories Creative Workshop. I'm your host, William Xavier, and for this kind of semi-quick video, I want to kind of focus on a technical aspect and really kind of highlighting looking at inks and inking. I know that this has kind of become a bit more popular lately in the creative memories world, but it's been around for a while. And even before inks came into the creative memories line, I was kind of playing around here and there with inks, but primarily with shading and blending with brush. I've moved into exploring with some stenciling and whatnot, and so that's what I want to talk about today real quick. Is our stencils are really nice, and I know I had one handy. I don't know where I just put it, but they are really handy. So this some just came out, and we can use these a variety of ways. Certainly with our inks and our brushes, we can also use pens and markers if we're not wanting to ink, and it's just the same principle, right? We kind of just outline and then we can color in the stencil. But what about shapes and images that don't have a stencil through Creative Memories or other companies? And so that's kind of what I'm going to look at today. I've done a couple of times, made my own kind of stencil using some of the Creative Memories punches. So I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the big pointer tips to kind of think about if you're going to go that route and use one of the Creative Memories punches and create your own stencil. So one piece that I always have quite a bit of, right, are these spare cardstock pieces. These are like 4x6 bright white cardstock pieces, because these come from the multi-pocket pages, what I think are now called multi-pocket sleeves. Because I'm sliding this out and sliding my photos in. So I've got quite a few of these, and I use these a lot to template punches where I'm not sure if a particular punch is going to fit on a page or fit the design of the page. So I'll typically grab one of these real quick, punch out a sample, and explore with it on my page. The other thing that these are helpful for certain is the inking and making your own stencil. And so it might not last as long as the plastic stencils, but they will certainly hold for a bit or hold up for a bit. And there's a couple of things to think about while we're going to create our own. You can see I've got a variety of punches out here. I've got some border punches, I've got some shape punches, and let me move these down. I've got some BMC cartridges, because there's a couple of different things to think about. I'm going to talk first about our shape punches. Okay, so I've got 3 examples here that will do a couple of different things. The shape punch, by definition, is going to punch out that shape, okay? So it's important to think about what that vision is that you have for the inked image. If you're going to use inks, what is that image that you're looking for? Because it's gonna be very different probably than what you might be thinking. The best type of route to go would be a knockout punch. Anchor is an example of a knockout punch, right? We can see on the bottom, it's just going to come and punch out that shape. Okay, so I'm going to get that shape punched out, and I can tell from where I punched on the paper what that shape is. It's an anchor. This is going to work the best if I'm going to want to ink an anchor onto page. I'm just going to sample that for you. Real quick. Right? We can see, gives us a really nice image. Okay. That's going to be our best bet. Any full shape punch that also is the same cutout from the paper that we punched from is gonna give us that really nice ink image. Let's say, for example, we take Jingle Bells. It's fun, it's nice, right? It's got bells on a string. Wonderful, right? Let's punch out though. And I'm gonna get some knockout pieces. So I'm just gonna push it over to my garbage. All right. All right, so the punched out piece is really what we're looking at, or what we're looking for, right? We can tell it's bells with string. When we look at the punch out from the paper though, we can't really tell that it's bells and a string. So if you go to try to ink that, this is the image you're going to get. You're going to just get this kind of unknown blob of something, right? I can't really tell what is that? Is that peaches on a tree? What is this? So that's kind of one piece to think about. Of course, right? You could, ink this area, take that punch out, and you'd have a little bit of a background behind it if you wanted. But if you're thinking you want this image as the inked piece, it's going to be hard to recreate because you would have to take those knockout pieces, take your punched out part of the paper and try to recreate it with some repo or some glue, precision glue, which you probably don't want to do that on the paper you're trying to ink, right? And then go ahead and ink. You could do what I call a shadow. I don't know if that's the real term for it, but you could take the punch out, right, and ink that, and it's going to get in, around and into the open spaces. That'll give you an idea, right? And you kind of create, a silhouette to an extent, but the shadowing is going to come off and away and onto your page. So if that's what you're kind of looking for, that would work for you as well. And then you have some punches that are kind of do both, right? Poinsettia is an older punch, and it's one of those that does kind of both in a way. It will give us, right? It's a knockout, right? And so it will look like a poinsettia any which way we use it, right? If I'm going to use it this way and kind of ink directly to get that silhouette, or if I want to use it, right, because I want that whole poinsettia to be what I want. So a few will work that way. The new date punch from the Global Getaway collection is kind of an example as well, right? It's going to give us nope, I lied. I forgot. I forgot it punches out the whole thing. But, it can be still used both ways. If I want just shade on the inside, I can tape it off. I can have an inked date there. Sorry, I forgot about that. So all in all, our knockout punches are going to be the best to work with on this idea. Some other examples. Okay, so border punches. Again, it's the same type of principle. We have, edging punches, we've got chain punches, and we've got knockout punches. Knockouts are going to be our best bet. Edge punches are going to similarly work with a stencil, like as a stencil that gives us an edge. So an example, this is actually a BMC, it's the wavy scallop, but it will give us, a shadowed edge, which way I'm kind of wanting to work with that, right? If I'm wanting to just kind of give some shading on the page coming away from, or if I'm kind of wanting to create, right, that impression of that inked edge. So that's how edges will work, or edge punches. Right, another example of an edge punch would be the new postage stamp, I forget the name of this one. I think it's like Vintage Stamp that came out with a Global Getaway would be another example of an edge punch that would give us an inked edge. But again, knockout is going to be our best bet. And you don't even have to necessarily punch the whole row. You will want to kind of give yourself a little bit of room, because as a stencil, we're going to need to use some inking tape as well to tape off areas so that we don't end up with, the blending brush pulling over onto areas we don't want inked. But you'd want to give yourself a little space there so that you have some room with your inking, so that it doesn't go off and onto the paper there. You just want to kind of keep it here. But again, you can use inking tape to tape this off so you can get nice crisp lines. And it's the same with the BMCs. And there's a lot of knockout options with the Border Maker cartridges, paw prints. Right, I think that would be really, really cute, especially with pet pages, instead of, having to punch out on paper and then, make sure that the punch out will pull through, or you have to put extra paper behind it so that you can really see the paw prints pop out more. You can just create a little stencil with some scrap. And voila, you're gonna have little paw prints. What's another good one? I've got Ancient Key, which is, another one that's a bit popular. Grab a new card here. And once again, and then, I can keep placing and moving along. I'm doing a whole border. And that's, another thing as your placement, one tip or trick that I like to use sometimes is using a pencil line. Right, so, right, I'm trying to figure out, okay, I want to get this lined up better, right? I can use a couple of tools depending on my you know, I might have cut this a little bit down. I might be keeping it this way. This is an easy one I could flip upside down or flip the other way. Use, right, my ruler here to come in and figure out, right, I can measure. This is about it's just after an eighth, right before a quarter, right? So I can find that measurement on my mat here to get that lined up. I can also just use some light pencil lines, right? I can think, okay, it might be right there. Is that on point? Not quite. Right, I need to kind of come up a little. Not really. Maybe here. That looks like I'm in the right spot. Line it up again. Get some ink. I can go. If you're using a lighter ink, you may need to erase that pencil line if that's what you're going to use, just so that the graphite doesn't kind of bleed into the ink. Darker ink will cover it, and you won't really get a bleed in with the graphite. So again, it kind of depends on what type of aesthetic you're going for. You know, so once again, right, knockouts are going to be our best bet to give us, you know, that inked image that's really going to pull through. We're really going to see what that is. Some of them, the punch out image can also be used as a stencil itself, and it's going to give us more of this kind of silhouette with the inked shading on the outside. If we use an edge style, right, it can give us the two effects. We can, of course, shade on the edge, the decorative edge, and come over if that's what we're wanting. But if we want to use it as a kind of inked decorative edge, we'll pull that shading more away from the cutout. And of course, if we're going to be making borders, we would just want to make sure you could punch a full strip. You know, if you have a full strip of 12-inch, that's what you're working in, 12-inch or 8-inch or 6 3/4 by 10, whatever. You can certainly punch a full strip of whatever and use that as your stencil. You just might need to use some more tape around, so that way you don't have the ink coming off and getting into other places that you're not wanting it. And that would work as well. You wouldn't have to fuss with measuring anything and getting, you know, that to be straight. It would be right there in your stencil, so you can certainly always do that as well. But as always, you know, I always suggest, you know, use some scraps, try things out, experiment a little bit before you start working on, you know, what actual project you're wanting it for, just so that you don't end up, you know, inadvertently, you know, making some mistakes and being pretty frustrated and unhappy and wanting to throw everything out the window. That's not going to be helpful. Some other things to think about, you know, instead of blending brushes, you know, you can always, you know, figure out how could I kind of create almost like a spongy effect coming away from that edge. Maybe I just want to edge, but I want it to kind of have a little character. I want some, you know, kind of some streaks or some type of like almost shading, but I don't necessarily want to have the blend shading effect. And it's just kind of play with it and kind of see what kind of works. You know, with direct on pad onto the paper. The same with here, right? I mean, this probably isn't going to work very well, but maybe I just kind of want more of a sponged effect, but I don't have a sponge, but I'm going to get more ink on there. It's not really going to work too well, so it kind of does, but kind of doesn't, and I'm getting a lot of ink here. So unless that's kind of the effect you're going for, which kind of looks neat too, you might want to get you know, some craft sponges and play around with that as well. But yeah, just kind of get a feel for holding the brush. Try different holding techniques. You know, you can hold at the handle, and we have, you know, a less controlled type of hold. I can bring my hand up where my first finger is kind of here at the tip, and I can get a little bit more pressure into certain areas if I'm needing to do that. So just kind of get a feel for how the tools work and what feels good for you, what you kind of feel comfortable with doing. Always practice on some scrap. You know, if you don't have inking tape, you can always use painter's tape, will work as well. It's a pretty low residue tape. Just be a little bit more careful if you're applying the tape right onto your paper or your page, and you're using really any tape, but primarily like painter's tape. Just be careful when you're removing it. Just go slow and steady, and you should be okay. It really doesn't stick to the fibers as much as other tapes would and rip. So yeah, hopefully our little technical tips here today help you want to explore more with inking and you know, take a little bit more of a bold step and make your own stencils and kind of see how those work out in some of your layouts. And as always, if you need anything, reach out to your advisor. You can reach out to me. And you know, stay safe, stay well, and as always, happy scrapping, and I'll see you next time.